what brought me to research the topic that I want to research was my experience. And my experience was that teachers who are very good people, that my colleagues are wonderful human beings, but they would say things to me in the hallway that would get me thinking, okay, wait a minute, this did not sound very welcoming, very like including me. What's going on here? So I started asking questions to them, and things got a little bit worse, a couple of years ago, right before the election, the presidential election. And then I started to wonder how the teachers, these comments, these very subtle comments that were impacting me, that were hurting me over time, they were piling up, how they are impacting the students, and especially the immigrant students. So I started to study implicit bias. So implicit bias are these stereotypes that we hold that are not, that are outside of our awareness. And they come out, of course, they are implicit, they are unconscious, they come out without we noticing. But the person who's on the other end receives. And it's actually, I believe that it's connected with another mechanism that is called a stereotype threat. When the threat of having a stereotype about oneself confirmed makes a person very anxious and make them shut down. So if you put this together in the classroom, you have a student that came from a Central American country or Mexico, and the student hears all the time that these students are not wanted in this country, that they are not accepted here, they are not welcomed. And then they hear something that the teacher may say in the classroom. Without them being unconscious, they will shut down. Then you can have all these wonderful resources that David mentioned, and you have students that will not accept. And this will compile with their parents being on the same receiving end of stereotypes. So I asked myself, what can be done? So what I think that can be done, I made this my research, is that we have to learn to question where our ideas, where our stereotypes are coming from. What are the ideologies underneath these stereotypes? For example, we can use a stereotype of the Asian, minorities, that they all know math. I know a number of kids in my class who teachers don't pay attention to them very much, the math teachers, because they are supposed to know math. So stereotypes get in the way. And sometimes if we don't learn to watch ourselves, how we are perceiving, we cannot stop these processes. So the first thing that we can do to counteract these stereotypes is to become aware that we have them. It's for granted. You could just take it for granted. For example, just like if you live in New York City, you cannot say that I live in New York City, but I never breathe smog. You're going to breathe smog because the smog is what it is out there for everybody to live. You're alive, you're breathing smog. So prejudice works like that. And with prejudice and microaggression, somebody just mentioned the word on the chat box. With prejudice and these microaggressions that come through implicit bias, there is only one antidote. We have to become aware of them. So teachers have so much to do, as we know, and it's just getting worse. It's standardized tests and everything. But teachers need to become aware of their own stereotypes, of the things that they are not thinking about all the time, and just question themselves. Part of this process is to become very familiar with race. What race, ethnicity, culture represents for you as a teacher, for me as a person. My particular journey was very confusing. Coming from Brazil, I come to New York, and, whenever I have to check a box of something, I look for a Latino box, and usually there is none there. Usually there is Hispanic, but Brazilians speak Portuguese, not Spanish, so we are not Hispanic. And I was like, what does it make me? And to realize that in this country, my previous racial identity was completely different than the one I have here. So I had to reinvent it. In this process, I learned a lot about who I am not, how others perceive me. And, talking about, being white. And again, I have to start to be very courageous to talk to my colleagues and everyone about it, because our immigrant students think about it all the time. They are going not only through adolescence development, the normal challenge of adolescence that we all went through, but they are also going through the process of developing an identity, an ethnic and racial identity, which most likely is very different than the identity that they had in their countries. So let's talk about, in their country, for example, they were not an immigrant, of course. And here they are. What does it mean? What does it mean in relationship to their color of their skin, to their ability to learn the language with or without an accent? How are we adults going to react to them? How are we going to give them the opportunities, connect them with the resources that there are there according to how we perceive them? And that goes back to the idea of tracking. We tend to track people. It's like this label pushing process. We see someone, we think stereotype, we activate, and we project this label. So I think that the job of educators is to become aware of who they are, their own race. Very important in the United States, because according to I have data here somewhere, according to the national statistics, white teachers are about 80-something% of the teaching force, but 50% of the students are not white. So we have a cultural disparity right there, cultural mismatch. And if white teachers think of themselves and their experiences in order to understand others, without taking consideration all the biases and the stereotypes that come with this, what are we doing? What are we projecting to the students? What are we expecting from them? So my work has been, revealing that, number one, we do have biases. Number two, we have to become aware of them. Number three, we have to understand how our own racial identity is framing the way that we perceive students' racial identities, students' experiences. This is big. This is not something, small that we can ignore. And let's talk about learning, main academic subject. How a person perceives themselves, how a student perceives themselves ethnically, racially, and in relationship to their immigrant status, determines how they're going to behave, if they're going to shut down or not, the information they will bring home to their parents, and how their parents then is going to form their opinion about us. So I think that besides, these three steps, what we also need to do is to reach out to the students and attempt to have courageous conversations. I loved when David said he split the word courage in courage, a radical courage. And I like that, because I think that to have courage, you have to, bump yourself up, to take action, to do something. There are a few trainings out there that is one that I attended last year by Glenn Singleton. This year is going to be in Pennsylvania. I don't make any money for advertising, but this model that he created, Courageous Conversation About Race, it's a very good model, because it gives teachers, and it was written for educators, gives teachers very specific steps on how to approach these conversations and how to talk to them. Another work that I'd like to mention that also gives a lot of ideas, practical ideas, is the work of a psychologist that I am her big fan, Beverly Tatum. She wrote this book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, and Why Are All the Kids Still Sitting Together? This is the 20th anniversary edition. And in this book, she talks about, first of all, it's completely updated. I think it's almost twice as thick as the first version. And she explains why this happened. So somebody said, very great question. We have to look, this book is a book that we can go back over and over again. One thing I want to mention, and I know that I don't have much more time, so I'm trying to pack with some key points here and give some suggestions for teachers. One thing that we have to do while having these conversations, we have to keep our ears open, like, you know, David mentioned. We have to listen, to be willing, to be open-minded and hear. But we have to do this with our heart. We have to put ourselves on the place of these students. There is a lot of Mexico and South America and Central America bashing. You know, why are all these immigrants coming here? What's going there? I wonder if most people know the history. Most teachers know the history of you know, Central and South America. I think that it was Eduardo Galeano wrote a book years ago. I don't have it here with me. It's on loan to somebody. He wrote this beautiful book, The Open Veins of Latin America. He explained what happened to Latin America, how Latin America was exploited first by the Europeans and then by the North Americans, and what happened to the people there. I think that we have to keep in mind the historical background of these people. I myself, I have a very aversive reaction when I see somebody in, you know, military green suit. Why? I grew up during the dictatorship. You know, we weren't allowed to leave the house. In Brazil, you know, since was from 1964 to 1989, you know, my whole childhood throughout college, I was living under this, you know, dictatorship regimen. And in my city, it was very strict. And many days after 7 p.m., nobody could go on the street. You could get shot, disappear. So I always think, what kind of government the students' parents grew in? You know, if they are my age, don't try to guess, please. And you know, how did they grow up, and how much of these traumatic experiences they passed on to their students? Also, we have to understand what happened in their countries that caused the present situation that is leading them to flee. Did we have any responsibility? Are we questioning? So the last message that I will leave is that, just like with our implicit biases, just like with the stereotypes that we have, and as well as with these assumptions we make of, you know, these places where our students come from, we have to ask, where did I get my idea from? Where did I first form this idea about how Mexicans are, how Puerto Ricans are, how, you know, Brazilians are? Where did I get this idea from? Not only that, the history books that I read that informed me about them, or the TV channels that I watch, where are they getting their information from? I think that if we become critical pedagogues, and again, going back to, you know, the Brazilian Paulo Freire that most educators have heard about, it's very important for us to question, where did I get this from? What's happening to this student? So that's the last message I'd like to give, and I'm very open for questions. And if anybody would like to contact me about resources that I mentioned here, and I have other ones to share, you can also feel free to email me. I will put my email on the chat box. Thank you.
Claire, did you have any questions for Alaisa? Is there anything you wanted to follow up on? We have a few questions from the chat box.
Oh,
so I think one of the things.
Are you asking me if I have a question? No, I'm just really thrilled that I get to go after Alaisa. I love working with her.
Same here.
In Long Island, where there was a series of hate crimes in the schools, and we worked together to make sure that students were listening to one another and understanding not only where their ideas were coming from, but where their colleagues and their other students' ideas were coming from.
So this does relate a lot to Federico's presentation yesterday, and I put the link in the chat box. It's on the agenda page if anyone wants to revisit it. Any tips on how we can confront our implicit biases, just our everyday things that we think may be so insignificant? Like, what are there any things that we can do?
For me? Okay, yes. the only way that we can confront our implicit biases is to become aware of them. If you don't know that, if you don't know what you don't know, there is nothing you can do about. So you have to first ask yourself, I think this about this person. Where did I get this idea from? And you have to do a little soul searching. Again, some of these books that I mentioned, especially Glenn Singleton's book, Courageous Conversation, about race. This book will give you all the tools that you have to start doing this work. There's another one from Ali Michael, Raising Race Questions, is actually a thin book. You can tell that I love it very much, right? This book is phenomenal, and that she will teach, it was written for white teachers. She works with white teachers, and her approach is beautiful because she knows how the teachers have good intentions. But this is the key. We have to understand that our intention and our impact don't always match. So with implicit bias, you might have a very good intention, but unless you are aware of them and make the decision to stop them, your impact may be completely different.
And just one quick question. You did mention that 80% of the teachers in the public schools are white. These might be some very difficult conversations to have among staff, among faculty, even going out into the community about law enforcement. How do you, just one quick tip before we move on to Claire, how do you start that conversation or engage with that discussion as a white person who really wants to make a difference?
So you have to understand, so I'm going to give you Glenn Singleton's tips, which is what I use. First, you have to stay engaged. You have to make the commitment to stay engaged. You have to remember one thing. We tend to think that, I ask my colleagues, right, teachers, so since when did you realize you were white? She says, me? I mean, I'm just normal. Look how much is charged, that comment, right? Normal. Normal means that if you're not white, you're not normal. So we have to start to think about it. What does it mean when we say that? How are people, perceiving that? So you have to just understand that 50% of your students are not like you. So it's not that they are not normal. They are just different, right? So that's how we have to perceive. So we have to, number one, stay engaged. Then we have to experience discomfort. Ali Michael wrote that the worst thing that you can ever call a white person, the worst thing, is a racist. It's, no other name calling a white person a racist is really, really negative. It's very offensive. So, but we have to understand that there is a system that is created out there to serve mostly white people in this country. So these immigrant students that are coming here, the system was not created to serve them. So how are they feeling? How are they being impacted? So we have to learn to experience a little bit of discomfort to have these conversations, because they are. The third step is speak your truth from your heart, of course. And the fourth one, we have to expect and accept non-closure. We are not always going to see eye to eye. We are not always going to understand. And the process of discovering our own racial existence, what it means to be, what we are, it's, again, a process and maybe lifelong. I remember having this conversation with Claire one time years ago. Don't mean to put Claire on this spot, but Claire basically has the whole world, right? The whole constellation of, different ethnicities. And, we were talking a little bit about, how we identify ourselves and what it means and how we can use our own experience to try to understand others.